Alright guys, making an ocarina. So, tools that you will need for this are your popsicle sticks that have the beveled edges. So the ones that are flat across the top and beveled on the sides. When I originally did this project, I had the one pointy one and the other beveled one. And I find there's really no benefit to that. The only thing that tends to happen is sometimes people use the wrong one for the wrong part. So I just use them both because they'll both cut through the clay just as easily. I like to have a wet towel. This is why I included the towels in our remote students kits, is so I can have something to clean off my hands and clean off my tools as I need to. I just want to make sure that maybe this is on a plastic bag or something so that it's not soaking into my canvas. You can see I left my sponge sit out without thinking about it. You know, this is only going to protect my table for so long, and then it's going to actually start to soak in my table. And I'm using the lid from my water container for my sponge so that I can have a wet sponge nearby. So the idea of an ocarina, again, is that usually, this is just kind of a whistle, it has no holes, but it's going to be a music playing device. It's a simple composition. It's just in it, and ocarinas are a multitude of shapes, but this is the easiest one to make out of clay, is this simple dome shape with a mouthpiece. So I have my opening cut with the bevel so that it collects the air, which you can see on here. So the air goes in through the mouthpiece, hits this bevel, splits the air, and that splitting of the air is what makes the sound. The round chamber helps to move around the air around on the inside and creates an environment that creates sound. This doesn't have to be perfect. I've seen some really pretty deformed ones in order to make that work. But the more even it is, the easier it's going to be to get it to create the sound. So you can see that when I make my first cut, it lines up as closely as it can with that inside wall. And then my second cut just needs to come towards that first one but leave a little bit of a space. So the space varies. Like this one is actually became quite large. And the space on this one is a little bit smaller and it's got some loose pieces in there. And that's the sound it makes. This one is multi. It's got 4 holes, so. And then if I cover all 4. It's not perfect, you know, the sound is not maybe as clear as it could be. It's just fun to have it make multiple notes, even if they're not exactly in key for anything. And so that's the basic structure of the ocarina. The smaller it is, the higher the sound is going to be. So I made this wee one. I had to just hand cut the bevel rather than using the popsicle sticks. And then I integrated there's one hole on top here that kind of changes the note. And then I made polka dots on it to kind of go with the hole. So let's see here. Just kind of fun. Makes the dogs a little bit crazy, but oh, I have 2 holes. Interesting. I don't think one was meant to be a hole. So little tiny piece, the smaller it is, the higher the tone is going to be. When I was doing a workshop with 7th and 8th graders, I made extras in case theirs didn't make sound, because you hate to have middle school kids being disappointed that their ocarina doesn't make noise. And of course, one kid whose didn't make noise, he picked the smallest, most obnoxious one that I'm sure his parents loved me for. All right, so I'm going to start with a chunk of clay, and I started into a ball because I want each side to be a half a ball. And this is a really small one. This is just a little bit bigger than a golf ball, honestly. And I'm going to cut it in half. So my wire tool, the wire tool with the handles on either end, the ones you guys have are plastic. The one I have at school is the plastic handles. This is what I have here. And I'm going to slice this in half. The idea is to make each half as even as possible. So this is clay straight off the block. and then I'm going to pinch it. And I'm going to basically push my thumb down in again until it's like, you know, about the thickness of the middle section of your little finger. A little thinner is okay. A little thicker is okay. I don't want it actually to be too thin, because if it's too thin, then I don't have a significant bevel. So where there are ceramic objects where I might want that to be a lot thinner, on this, I don't want it to be a lot thinner. So I'm going to just press this out into a half sphere. It's kind of lumpy right now, but that's okay, because that will change. And if I have any cracks developing along this edge, but it doesn't feel like it's getting too dry, I can literally just blend them with my thumb or my fingers. Just blend out the cracks as they happen. And then if I feel like it's getting too dry, then I want to dampen my fingers on my sponge. Pinching until basically it's an even thickness. Trying not to pinch anything too much. It's a lot easier to make it thinner than it is to make it thicker. To make it thicker, I've basically got to add more clay back in. And we can do that because it's clay, but it's still easier if I can just keep control of it while I do it. So it only got a little bit bigger, but I really need this to be hollow in order for it to be an ocarina. And even if I'm just creating a hollow form, you know, I want to create something that's a little bit solid looking, but is not. There are several reasons why I don't want something to be solid. One, it's just a waste of materials. It doesn't need to be. Whatever I make is going to be exceedingly heavy. So let's say this is, of course, if I'm not turning it into an ocarina. In order to be an ocarina, it's got to be hollow. But other shapes I want to be thinner for a variety of reasons. And one is it's a lot of clay that I'm using then. The object's heavier than it needs to be. It also means that it's going to take forever to dry. There's going to be uneven drying because it's so thick that my outside is going to dry a lot faster. And my inside is still going to be kind of gooey. It also means that when it heats in the kiln, it's going to heat unevenly because it's going to take a while for that heat to penetrate such a thick object. So the outside of the surface is going to be really hot while the inside can be hundreds of degrees cooler. So you think about even when you cook something in the oven, your oven temperature can be 350. So like Thanksgiving turkey comes to mind because of course that just happened. Usually you want that turkey to go to right around 165, somewhere in there. So your oven's at 350, but it takes hours for the inside of the turkey to get to 165. So if you have a really thick piece of clay, the same thing's going to happen. The outside might be hot, your air might be hot, but it takes a long time for the inside to get to temperature. And that can cause warping, cracking, which I don't want. All right, so I form my second half. I want these two halves to line up pretty well. So that might mean pressing it out a little bit more. It also might mean evening my edge to make it match up a little bit better. And that looks pretty good. So at this point, I don't have an extra one of the wire brushes, so I'm going to kind of use a toothbrush for this. Same idea, it's just not going to scratch quite as well as the wire brush that you guys have. I'm going to use the toothbrush to scrub that, kind of work the surface, work that water into the surface so that my surface is sticky as much as possible. And since I can't really dig in with that, I'm going to use another tool that I have, which is basically a bunch of pins on a stick. So now I've got to use two tools to kind of do what the one wire brush does. because I need to dig in a little bit more than that toothbrush. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to add a little more water so that it's not, you can see it got kind of dry from digging it in. So I want to make sure that's nice and wet. And then I'm going to seal these two halves together. And this is where, like I said in my demo earlier today, in an ideal world, I would let this sit before I blended it together. Like if I'm not rushing in the demo, and that's actually what I'm going to do now. I'm going to let this sit and firm up a bit before I blend it. Because right now it's actually slippery. When I press it together, the slip is pushing out, and it's actually hard to hold on to because it's so slippery. So I want this to kind of firm up, kind of like glue drying, but it's not glue. But kind of that idea. I want that to start to really stick. I want the water to get absorbed and for that to be an even consistency, because right now it's sticking, but because that's still really wet, these could start to slide back apart. So I'm going to let it sit, turn the video off, and I'll start it again when we're ready to go. Oh God, my low battery thing came on. Oh well, we'll do that again. So I let this sit yesterday until it got firm enough, and then I wrapped it up with a plastic bag so it would stay where I left it essentially. So I can blend this with my fingers. And then, so now I'm not sliding off of it like I was when I first put it together. And then also I can use a rib. Ribs. So you guys have in your kits, you have metal ribs like this that don't have teeth on them like this does. Essentially, all of my ones that have smooth edges are either at school or in my studio. I don't seem to have any at home, which is a little bit surprising. So I can use this actually. I can use this edge of it. And very often I will use the serrated edge to smooth stuff. It's going to leave it textured at first, but it really takes the high bumps off of stuff. And your kits have little combs in them for much the same reason, but also you can use those for texture. But for the sake of keeping it pretty close to what we did, I had a margarine container that I actually have a whole bunch of empty ones in the basement that were never used, that were donated, and I cut it into the shape of a rib so that I have this pretty decent smooth curved edge and a straight edge. It's way softer than the metal rib, but it'll still pretty much do the same thing. It's just going to be harder to kind of scrape it and deposit a little bit, but not impossible. All right, so I get it into the basic form. This is pretty firm now. The clay firmed up quite a bit. I kind of lost track of it yesterday. This is why it's a good idea when you set something aside at home to firm up. Set a timer for yourself. This is in our dining room, so it was kind of hard to miss entirely. All right, so I'm finding my original seam, which I believe is right around here. And then in order to make that alignment for the ocarina, I'm going to actually tamp this down on the canvas. So I'm going to create a flat side. And because this is firmed up quite a bit, it actually is holding quite a lot of air. As my clay dries, it shrinks. And so because this firmed up enough, it has actually shrunk and made the air really, really tight inside. So that's as far down as I can get it, I think, without blowing it apart. And I'm going to poke a hole in it. I thought I had a needle tool. Apparently I don't have a needle tool either. All right, I'm going to poke a tiny hole in it. I'm going to seal it back over after I tamp it down. Let's see if you can hear it hiss. And there's a little tiny puff. I don't know if you heard it or not. I want that to be a little bit flatter. Okay, that's a bigger flat area. And I'm going to seal it back over. So if I want this to be smoother, I can continue to work on that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause and I'm going to do that for just a few minutes so you don't have to sit here while I'm doing it, and then I'll come back. All right, so I've used just this margarine container, and I was smoothing and there were some really bumpy spots, so I used it to scrape too. And I'm going to smooth it just a little bit again. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I want to have a little bit of a blank canvas before I add other texture back onto it. So I want to do like the aggressive stuff before I work on making the sound, like aggressive stuff to this surface before I start making the sound, because I don't want to distort that sound when I work on it. Now I will do the sound before I turn it into something else, because it's going to be hard to get in there correctly otherwise. All right, so I've got my basic dome shape, and this is a lot smaller, you can see, than some other ones that I've done. These don't need to be huge. You don't need to make them monstrous. I'm thinking of making this kind of leggy, like have it kind of stand up a bit, so I thought about making it smaller. So I need a mouthpiece, and generally I like to keep them just a small rectangle. Actually, I need a little bit more than that. Big enough that I can push the popsicle stick in easily without cracking it, but not too long. In other words, I would really just make the mouthpiece without considering what it's going to be afterwards. Don't try to make like a giraffe and make the neck like super long and have that be the airway, because if you're going through the trouble of making this make sound, I want to give you success at having it make sound. So I'm going to shape that so that it attaches on the front. So I'm trying to kind of just push it in, make sure it fits nicely. Could definitely come in a little bit on the bottom because it curves under a little bit on the bottom. So I want to have a good fit before I attach it, because it'll just make attaching it work that much easier. So, and again, I don't have the one of the metal brushes. In fact, I think they're all accounted for in class. No, I should have one extra. I should. I just don't know where I do. I don't know. I ordered extras, and then I had one of my own, and I think I packed it up and took it to school. And I haven't quite figured out where stuff goes in that classroom yet, so I probably stuck it somewhere weird thinking I would remember where it was. All right, so I'm going to score it and wet it, and then basically, like I said, you're kind of creating the slip as you go. I dripped a little bit on there. If you're working at home and on a good table, if you have like a plastic tablecloth, like a picnic tablecloth or a garbage bag or something to put on your table, especially if it's a nice wood table, please don't make your parents be angry with me because you were working with wet materials on your wood table without thinking about the fact that that was going to soak through that little tiny piece of canvas that I gave you. So I'm going to attach that and let that sit for a moment. I'm going to kind of blend it in nicely. So again, I want that to line up with the bottom. I want it to be flat and continuous with the bottom. And then again, I probably want that to firm up a little bit before, but not nearly as much as I let this firm up. So I want to let that firm up a little bit though before I try to push the popsicle stick in there. So this might need to be a little taller actually. I'm thinking about how thick the bottom of this was. So I want the mouthpiece to be tall enough that it's about double the thickness of the piece, so that when I push the popsicle stick in the middle, it won't, it'll divide this without cracking it. So I'm just going to shape it to make it a little bit bigger. Kind of looks like a pig snout right now. I have no intention of making a pig. Sorry. I like pigs. They're very sweet. Especially the woolly ones. They're awesome. And very friendly. Although we went to a petting farm. They had woolly pigs after the stay-at-home order was lifted. And all the animals were trying to bite me. Not bite, but they were kind of nibbling at me. I don't know what it was about me that many of them wanted to nibble on me, but they definitely did, including the very large woolly pigs. It's very strange. And the geese. Everybody tried to nibble on me. All right. That's actually probably good. So like that. My thickness is probably about like that because it's not a very big piece. So again, when I push this in, I want to, let me get my little model out here. I want to try to hit so that it comes right across here. What I usually do is I aim up just a little bit first until I feel it break through. And then I know I'm good. If I feel it break through, then I'm not just continuing to go into this. So I can kind of course correct as soon as I know. So you can kind of see on here, I guess it's a little bit wider because I tilted it up as I was doing that. So I'm going to do that. Either stick doesn't matter. The bevel just helps it to push through more easily. Bingo. So right along the bottom there, I'm going to kind of form this around that a little bit. And then again, so that first cut lines up as best it can with this continuous form. You can kind of see, you might not be able to see it on the camera. I can see when I push that first cut up, it pushed some of the clay up. There's not much you can do about that. You can't go back in and clean it out. I mean, you probably could. You could probably open the whole thing up, but that seems a little bit ridiculous. So I'm going to try to figure out where the wall of my original dome, where that is, probably right around there. I'm going to go in a little bit further, a tiny bit further, just to be safe. I need to make sure this stick is in far enough that I'm going to hit something. So I'm leaving this one in the ocarina, and we're going to push this in until it hits that other stick. So I've got to turn it. There we go. I want to have something to cut against. So I'm going to push it in until I hit the other stick. I can feel it. And I'm going to pull it out, and I can actually see the stick in there. And then I'm going to go in at a 45-degree angle. Oops. See, I'm pushing on, I just pushed on this too much. My mouthpiece is still soft. That's okay. I think I can actually pull it out. Maybe not. I'm going to stick the other end in. Just want to kind of tighten this around it a little bit. All right, and then I'm going to find my knife tool, which again I don't have, but I grabbed, and I left it in the basement. Oh, nope, got it. So I have an X-Acto knife here. It still needs to be tightened. This is the X-Acto knife that I bought in college, from college art classes. Right, now just cut that free and kind of pop that out. And that opening's kind of big. I made that a little wider than I meant to, but we'll try it and see what it does. So it looks good. I think when I look in, it looks like the clay is away from the opening. That first cut could have been over a little bit more. So we'll see. Okay, nope. So I'm gonna just push down on this a little bit. So that sounds like there's too much air coming out. I think I made that opening way too big. Let me first make sure that this hole goes all the way through. Okay. Alright, this is where the problem solving starts to happen. Trying to figure out. So I think by the sound that that's making, there's a lot of air blowing right out of that. So I think it's a little bit large. So I'm actually going to fill this back in a little bit. Actually, I'm going to just fill it back in. I'll scrub it with my toothbrush a little bit with water. I'm going to actually pack clay back in here. Smooth it out. Again, I might want to let that set up a little bit more, or I can just, plow ahead, see what happens. I'm going to go in with my beveled edge, down until I hit the popsicle stick. And I'm going to go in at my angle, and my stick is not going in straight, but that's okay. Go in at an angle. I'm going to start, this is not as thick as I thought it was, so I'm going to start a little closer this time. And then I made these just by basically sanding the edge of the popsicle stick until it was a bevel. And so on the other end, I actually made a little knife tool too. It's a little thick for that, so we'll go ahead and use the X-Acto knife. I probably actually need to sand that a little bit more. All right, pop that out. That looks a little better. It looks more proportional to the Ocarina. So I can see, I don't know if you can see, there's a little bit of clay inside there from pushing this in. It's just kind of hanging out. And I want that to go away. So I'm not going to try to pull it out because I'm going to risk damaging other stuff. I'm just going to push it so that it's away from the opening. So what happens is you push it in and then pull it out. And sometimes the clay kind of gets back over the opening. And I'm going to try. Awesome. Such a satisfying sound. And then I need to make my holes. And again, I think I left all my tubes at school. I have a whole huge bin of them at the studio. I have a, there we go. I can also use a drill bit. Because everybody has random drill bits on their dining room table, right? So I can do essentially the same thing. I don't need a drill. I can just twist it by hand. I'm going to clean my clay out as I go so that I'm not pushing it all in. And it's still stuck in there a little bit. So, oh, there, I can see cleanly now. So we're going to try that one. Sorry. There's something really satisfactory about making something that makes sound. All right, I'm going to do 3 holes. If it still makes noise, it sounds like it probably will. Because it is such a small ocarina, I'm not going to do more than 3. It's just a lot. That wasn't as clean as I want it to be. So I have to blow a little harder, but it's still making noise, and that's good. So if I hit a point where, like, I did a 4th hole or a 5th hole, and it stopped making a nice tone, like it just was like air blowing through it and no actual tone, then I would fill that last hole back in. Just take a piece of clay. Tell you what, I'll drill a 4th one just to see. I think it's probably still going to make noise, but actually, that kind of sucks. So that's perfect. So that's kind of its limit. I could play with this a little bit more to get it more exact, because there's probably a point in the design where I could do a 4th hole in it, but I don't really want a fourth hole in it anyway. It's too small of a piece to have a fourth hole. So I'm just using some water and kind of squeezing it into this little bit of clay a little bit, because the clay's been sitting out and it's not very gooey anymore. And I could get fresh out of the bag, but I may as well use the stuff that I have right here. And I'm just going to push it in to that hole. And I'm going to seal it. Let's check this. Awesome. So I want to avoid mucking this up and this up now that I have it. Like, that's not very pretty right now, but I probably want to get it a little bit, let it get a little firmer so that that air passage stays the way that it is. Same with this. Like, there's a couple things I could clean up, but I don't want to mess with it. I don't want to push it in. So if I add legs onto this, I want to be careful about not pushing in that part, because then it's not going to line up properly. So probably I want to let it firm up a little bit. And this is a really good opportunity to talk about two things. One thing I wanted to mention earlier that I forgot about, but the best time to transport your pieces. So there are six stages of clay. I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to be wrong. It should be 6. So there's slip, which is the watered down clay, really watery clay. There's plastic, which is the state that it's in right now. The stage that it's in right now, where it's pliable, but it's not gooey. It's not leaving big slimy stuff on my hands. There's leather hard, where it is firm, and that's kind of where this is right now. It's like firm, like even though it's got holes in it, I can push on it and it doesn't squish. This is still kind of plastic. So leather hard, where it's firm but not dry. Leather hard is the stage in which I want to transport anything that I have made. So when you get something and it's done, it's finished, and you're bringing it back into school in order to get it fired, you're going to let it firm up. And if you wrap it in the plastic bags that I included in the kits are pretty cheap. And they're kind of nice in that they're smaller, they're thin. You can wrap it really, really closely rather than having a lot of air trapped in the bag. But let it get firm, or wrap it in a way where there's a little bit of air trapped in the bag so that your piece can firm up a bit. Because when it's really, really plastic, when it's really, really soft, obviously it can dent really easily. So I don't want to transport it like that, because something might get squished. When it's dry, like totally dry, the 4th stage of clay is bone dry. What's also referred to as, if it's a finished piece that's dry, it's referred to as greenware. That stage, it's brittle. If you've ever, like, the easiest analogy is dirt that's dried, like on the bottom of your shoe or on the sidewalk. You think about how easily it breaks apart or it breaks off, versus when it's wet, how easily it continues to stick to the bottom of your shoe. So when it's dry, it's very brittle. There's also, bisqueware. That's bisque. That's when your pieces have been fired the first time. This stage. So it's been fired but not glazed. And then glazeware. So slip, plastic, leather hard, bone dry, or greenware, bisqueware, and glazeware. 6 stages. So leather hard is where we want to transport it. And the other thing I was going to say, so my little handmade tool. If you are ever in need of a tool that you don't have at home, think about whether it's something that you could make. I have to hope I didn't mess that up. Oh, I did a little bit. Oh my God. See, I shouldn't have messed with it. I should have just left it alone. Think about if it's something that you can make out of something that you have at home. Please always check with your parents before using anything that is not yours. specifically, or even something that is yours that they maybe bought you that you need to ask them before tearing it apart. Oh, hey now. Awesome. Okay, now I'm not going to touch the bottom anymore. So before cutting up a container of your mom's to make something, check with her first. Again, I don't want parents calling the school and saying, your ceramics teacher told my son or daughter to cut up my good Tupperware container. If it says Tupperware on it, do not cut it, please. Stuff's expensive compared to other plastic containers. It's not like it's buying a car, but... All right, so at this point, I can do other things to it to make it into some sort of creature. So I'm going to add, I think, some legs on this guy. And I want them to be kind of skinny, but they can't be too skinny or it won't stand on them. So I'm going to roll this out. And I'm going to... I'm wetting my canvas just a little bit so that this isn't drying out as I roll it, because this canvas has been sitting around since the end of last semester. All right, and I'm going to be a little funky with this. I'm going to take my wooden stick here and add a little bit of a spiral. So it looks like it's twisted, but it's not actually twisted, because if I actually twisted the clay with as dry as it is right now, it probably would not be very good. All right, so I think this can be 2 legs. He's probably not going to be able to stand on these legs until this has been fired. So maybe I need to build him upside down. So I need to think about that for a minute. Not entirely, but... And maybe he's a tripod. No, I can do 4 legs. One's going to be bent though, so he's actually standing on 3. Otherwise, if you've ever tried to make anything level with 4 legs, it can be challenging. So I always need to do the roughing up of my surface, or what's referred to as scoring. And scoring means to kind of cut part way through something. I always need to do that though to both surfaces before I attach something. So I'm going to re-wet this a little bit because otherwise it got a little dry. When you guys are using your wire brushes, I think it'll actually work a lot easier. So I'm going to do one of these legs. You know, I think I'll stand once it's firmer, but so I'm going to do, oh yeah. All right, I'm going to keep going with this. I'm not going to talk because I'm probably just going to speed up this section. I do want to clean this up. I don't want it to just be, I want that extra slip to stick out a little bit, and then I let it kind of firm up a little bit and shrink back. And then when it's still, though, pretty easy to wipe away, I'm going to wipe away my extra. I don't want it to be rough. Cleaning up. You know, working with clay is considered a craft medium because it takes craftsmanship to create it. And then also clay is a material that's used to make functional things, even if that isn't primarily what it's used for. It's used to make things that are used in your household. And a lot of those materials that are used to make things in your household, clay, metal, so in terms of metal like jewelry or jewelry working, furniture design is considered craft. Glass working is usually considered craft because those are materials that have been used traditionally to make things that you use, but they are also used in much more sculptural or art-based projects that are more about communication and telling a story than they are about functional things. We watched that video of Roberto Lugo talking about his work, and when they showed his pieces of things, he makes pots, but they're art pieces. There's so much more to them than just being a pot. So I always want to consider that's why it's craft, though. That's why it's considered craft, but also anything that requires craftsmanship. That means I want to consider craftsmanship. I'm allowed to have something look messy as long as it's, something that the messy is part of the message. But it should still be very well made. So like that mouthpiece, I'll clean that up a little bit later, hopefully. Actually, I think I can do it now if I'm very, very careful. So I'm going to just kind of do that. And make sure I don't crush that opening at all. And then I'm going to be, blowing on this. So I don't want it to be sharp. So I want to make sure that that's nice and soft. I can take my sponge and sponge away a little bit. I don't want to do a lot. This clay, as I've said before, has sand in it. If I sponge it a lot, I'm actually going to wipe the clay off and I'm going to expose the sand, and then my surface is going to be really, really gritty. All right, so I need to let this firm up a bit before I do anything else to it so that my legs are a little sturdier and more well attached before I try to attach other things onto it. All right, he's firmed up a little bit. Definitely it could be firmer. But I've been working on some stuff in the meantime, so I wanted to kind of show you what I had in mind. So I've done a few sketches just to get an idea of what I'm going to do with his texture. And I started with sort of some scale things, and then I actually started playing with the clay and made some spikes and thought spikes would be nice. I was trying to figure out how to attach them, whether he had a tail, if I'm going to do anything to the mouthpiece to make it more face-like, because he seems very frontal. Like that's definitely where he wants to go. That could also be his tail. Oh God, now I have to think about that. Okay, and that might work. I don't know. I got some more thoughts to do. But so the idea is I was gonna give him like 3 eyes. See if I can get it to stand without hurting it. So the idea is that they're gonna be like on top of, if you guys can see, on top of the little stick here, and then a third one like coming out up here, and then I made some little tiny twisty things, kind of like the same way that I did his legs. Figure some spikes would be kind of fun. I need some texture on there. I might do some texture on here before I attach those, because it's not like, I worked really hard at getting it smooth, but it's still not super smooth. So that might need a little bit of work still. The legs definitely need to firm up before I start trying to press things onto the top. I'm still probably going to have to support it underneath, but definitely that. So all these things, basically, this towel is just a little bit damp. And even if it's not, I just want to kind of cover those little things up as I make them, because they're going to get really dry otherwise. What was I just thinking of? Oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah. So I've been making those by taking a little tiny piece of clay and just rolling it so that it's a little bit tapered, and then adding some texture, and then cutting them in half. I can also just as easily shape them with my hands. The eyes actually I shaped with my hands. So I did, and it's just from playing. Like I was just kind of rolling a piece of clay around, and the first one came out like somehow like almost perfectly football shaped. And I'll have to do it on purpose. So it came out looking like that. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like I was gonna make it round, and it came out kind of football shaped, and I'm like, I like that. So then I had to make the other ones do that, even though the first one was kind of a fluke. And then to put eyes in them, I started with this, and that was good, but I felt like it wasn't quite enough. Like just literally the plain end of the drill bit, and then I came in with the pencil and did a little pupil in there. I don't want to go too crazy with it. This is already going to be pretty delicate, so I don't want to go a lot more delicate than that. All right, so I want to cover those up so that they don't dry out as much. I don't want to put them back in the clay bag because I'm afraid they're going to stick to the clay. I could dampen this, except I'm afraid they're going to get too wet then. I can dampen them as I apply them to it, but I have to decide how I'm going to do that. So I have to decide what kind of texture I'm going to have on here, if I'm going to have texture on here. And I think I do want texture on here. And then I think I'm going to build around the mouthpiece now that it's firming up to, like I don't want to get in there. I don't want to get anything in here, but maybe to make the head a little more round. Like, I don't know. I really don't know yet. It still might be a tail. Except then I've got to, when I blow the whistle, I've got to kind of blow in his back end, which is a little bit weird. So I have to decide if he's walking, which way. I don't know. I think he's going this way, even though he could be stepping forward. I think the way that the other legs, this leg, I think he's stepping forward. I think this is his front. Yeah, these decisions are important. All right, he's standing okay. All right, so I'm going to do for texture before this gets too hard. I think about something with that, or this end. Oh wait, or just the pencil maybe even. Oh wait, yeah. Pretty sure this is how I did the dots on my tiny ocarina. And maybe not all the way, maybe just a stripe or something. All right. Hmm. Trying to be really careful here. This is so skinny. It's kind of stupid to do it like this. I want to put just enough water on to soften the top of it without it running down and softening his little eye perch. I decided to just go 2 eyes. These are too delicate to do 3. I'm using the X-Acto knife to score so that I can be really precise with it. And it's actually skinnier than my pins, so the toothbrush doesn't work as nicely as the wire brush does for kind of scratching at the same time as adding water. It tends to be a little more on the surface than the wire brush. Awesome. Okay, his tail's probably, nope, not quite. Very carefully, his tail's still prepped. One thing I can use for cleanup is a stiff brush. So I've got some slip around the base of these spikes. It's kind of scary to clean. But I don't want it to be like sharp and messy when it's fired. All that stuff that stands out a little bit when it's wet clay always seems to stand out so much when it's dry. So I just want to get in there and smooth it out while it's still soft enough to kind of blend a little bit. Doesn't have to be super soft. Mostly want to brush any crumbly bits away, soft spots. No, I don't want to have, I want it to look intentional. It looks pretty good, I think. I'm going to bend this one spike down here. I was trying to mess with his tail while the camera was off, and I actually bent this one almost completely off. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I still haven't been able to see his eyeball. So I'm going to pull this away. Ooh, so far, so good. Oh, he's really hard to pick up with the spikes on. This is something you want to think about in the design. Not the original design, but while you're building it. Like, you need to be aware of being able to pick it up. So the other thing I want to clean up is under his eyeball. And so, see, I have to be really careful here. I can take this whole thing right off. And all that. If I've done a good job of attaching, it usually means there's a little bit of slip that's kind of pushed out. And a little bit is fine, but sometimes it can be kind of ragged. So I'm just trying to clean that up a bit. I'm not going to do anything crazy like put eyelashes on him or anything, but I like the fact that he has nostrils. All right. Oh, see? This is what I'm talking about. I'll see if you guys can see. So like right here, I've got some crumbly stuff. And that's from the slit pushing out. And then kind of just getting a little bit weird. So I just want to kind of blend that a little bit. It doesn't have to go away. It just needs to be a little bit smoother. Otherwise that's going to be sharp. So I can't flip him upside down anymore because of the spikes. So he's going to have to stand on his legs. So again, a little bit of roughness here. I'm going to have go away. And I just blended one of the holes here. So I'm going to just reassert that a little bit. Those don't have to be perfect. But I don't want them to, I don't want too many of them to fill in. These got a little weird for me. Holding it weirdly. There's a lot of weirds. Alright, so tail needs to be blended a little bit, I think. Yep, definitely. Got a chunk of slip just sitting off of there. So again, I'm going to use a brush. Your brushes are soft like this one. A stiffer brush would work better for this, but I want to make sure that I'm pretty much using what you guys have. So his tail definitely is cracked a little bit. And I'm going to blend that. So it's where, unfortunately, I had one of the twists right where it was bending. And let's see if I can hold this and blend it at the same time. It was causing a weak point. It's kind of like scoring something and then bending it. One of the ways you can cut like metal rods is actually to take a chisel, a cold chisel, like a thicker chisel, and put a dent in it. And then bend it back and forth, and it'll snap like bending a wire back and forth. Right, hold on, I think I'm good. I think that's better. Yes. Okay, the chances of him making into school intact are about, I don't know, I got about 50-50 chance. So again, I'm gonna let him firm up, but not dry completely. I want this to be leather hard when I transport it. And the reality is he may not come to school because I'm going to be doing the bisque firing in for all of you guys at my studio. My personal studio is what I was going for. So that we can get stuff solidified pretty much right away. You guys are at home. I'm going to have you do this kind of all in one. I don't have any underglazes here. The colorants that I included in your kits, we'll go over this before I get too far. The colorants that are in your kits, you guys can paint those on before it goes in the bisque fire. You do want it to be leather hard when you do that too. I don't know, it might be easier to bisque it. I'd almost rather do, I'll think about that. Oop. There he is.